Hi, I'm Gavin,
And I'm Dave.
and you're on the fringe.
Come along with us for a ride on a podcast where we talk about an area or a thing going on in the world that needs more attention, just like you do. Let's go.
On the fringe. Here we go.
Welcome back to On the Fringe, everybody. This is Dave. I'm here with Gavin,
Whoa.
and this is an episode we were not planning on recording. And we threw this together last minute because this was something, and this is something that needs a ton of attention. And we've done a couple of episodes about the future of warfare. And this
Mhm.
episode, I think, Gavin as well, ties into the future of war and the future of warfare. We're going to be
Oh,
talking,
100%. 100%.
we're going to be talking today a little bit about the recent drone attack that Ukraine pulled out of its hat. I shouldn't say that. It wasn't pulled out of its hat. It was an ace up Ukraine's sleeve. When Trump said, "Oh, Zelenskyy, you don't have any cards," well, he had this ace up his sleeve for a very long time because this is not
Mhm.
something they planned in about 2 weeks.
No. And apparently it took them, according to the Ukrainians, it took them about a year and a half of planning. And basically what happened was a series of drone attacks occurred at five different air bases throughout the Russian Federation, and these air bases were very spread out. Ukraine used drones stored in container trucks. They used about 117 drones. These are first-person viewer drones to attack A-50, Tu-95, and Tu-22M3 bombers. A-50's an early warning aircraft, but the other two are strategic bombers. And these are some of the most expensive items in the Russian aerospace forces. These are very big ticket. A Tu-95 is the Russian equivalent of a B-52. They don't make them anymore. They don't really make the Tu-22s anymore either. These are very expensive, essentially irreplaceable aircraft. And they've actually been used extensively in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict because they can carry a huge amount of cruise missiles, and they have been used to bombard Ukraine over the last couple of years. According to Ukraine, the cost of their attack, and they're claiming initially they claimed they blew up over 40 aircraft. The last statement I saw was lower than that. It was in the teens. Still significant if they hit any of these bombers. Initial estimate was it was around or over $7 billion. It's probably significantly less, but probably still in the billion range. At least 1 or 2 billion, I would say.
Well, I think too, okay, you calculate the cost for the Russian military assets. Also, you're going to have, I'd say, a huge increase in domestic security in Russia after this. And this is
Mm.
something, I mean, in some ways, you look at this and go, this is going to change the landscape of Russia's internal intelligence and external intelligence agencies. It's going to change the FSB and the GRU. FSB is kind of like the CIA. The GRU is kind of like the DIA. It's more military intelligence. But there's probably going to be a lot of heads that are rolling in Moscow and in regional areas of Russia, especially around Murmansk and then around Irkutsk, where some of these attacks happened. Because this is something I think they were not expecting. Putin was shocked. The Russian people were shocked. And this is absolutely disastrous for Russia in terms of cost and in terms of prestige. And I think it's a tremendous win for the Ukrainians.
Massive. I mean, it's just so spread out. If you look at this on a map, the fact that they were able to pull off a simultaneous attack is kind of ridiculous.
Hmm.
Uh, it's like, to give an American equivalent, it's like someone hit air bases in Alaska, Texas, Florida, and Iowa all at the same time. Um, it's that spread out. So the fact that they were able to do this, the fact that, I mean, the planes were just sitting there. There was no real defense as such. There weren't even nets as far as I could tell. Um, they were completely unprepared. So yeah, you're completely right. They're going to have to totally change how they defend, how they group their aerial assets, where they put them. And yeah, a bunch of people are going to get fired. Probably people are going to go to jail for incompetence because
Oh
this
yeah.
makes so many people look so bad. Um, the Russians, also you have to remember the Russian state, kind of no matter who's at the top of it, prides itself on having really strict internal security.
Hmm.
This this is just a massive pie in the face moment. They have just completely dropped the ball. And yeah, as you say, I think this really makes the Ukrainian intelligence services in a lot of ways, because if you can pull something like this off, there's really not a lot you can't do. Uh,
Yeah.
it's it's also just worth noting, before we move on, this is unprecedented because these planes, particularly the Tu-95, these are commonly used as nuclear assets. These are strategic nuclear bombers. Um, that did not deter the Ukrainians. They basically attacked the Russian Strategic Air Command equivalent and were not deterred by the presence of nuclear forces, by the possible presence of warheads, just didn't care, went ahead, did it anyways. So, on top of everything else, I think they're kind of demonstrating that nuclear deterrence, a non-nuclear state attacking a nuclear state, that's no longer an issue for people. They'll go
Hmm.
ahead and do it.
Yep. And the cost as well of this attack is much
Mm,
less than one of those planes that Russia had invested hundreds of millions of dollars or more in. And I think that's the key to this whole thing
yeah.
is this drone attack was very cheap for Ukraine to do. And it's very, very costly for Russia, not only financially, but for Russia's prestige. And I mean, Russia is completely embarrassed. And you go on and like you look at RT. I mean, RT is not saying anything about this. There's an op-ed I just pulled up, and they're calling it the last drone parade, where this is Ukraine's final kind of act before Ukraine capitulates and gives in because they don't want to, I guess, negotiate from a point of weakness. And this shows that Ukraine still has, in my opinion, a lot of fight left in them, and that the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian government has done a very good job of training average Ukrainians to fight.
Mm.
So the very best, Russia would be facing something like a counterinsurgency from Ukraine probably for a very long time, even if this thing does end tomorrow, where the Ukrainians are not going to fight, they're not going to give up. And Russia needs to take a step back and look at this and go, hey, these guys do mean business. And maybe we bit off a little bit more than we could chew by sticking around this long. And the Russian people, I think, probably are not going to be able to say anything about this other than, oh, this is terrible for Russia. You say anything else, then you're going to be labeled as a foreign asset and you're very likely going to be spending time behind bars. So this is just
Very
going to make the
likely.
Russian state stronger, more afraid of anything external outside of Russia, and they're just going
Mm.
to continue to clamp down on freedoms and on the average life of a Russian person.
They really can't do anything else. I mean, This, I think, demonstrates, they've been towing a very hard line. And I think the belief is eventually the Ukrainians are just going to be ground down. They're going to have to capitulate. We're going to get what we want eventually. I think what this demonstrates is that even if the Ukrainian government capitulates, there are so I mean, first of all, the thing to say about Ukraine is like a lot of post-Soviet states, they have multiple intelligence agencies. So the people who pulled this off, the SBU, they're one of, I think, half a dozen agencies, all with their own budget, all with their own personnel, all pulling off their own projects. Um, if the Ukrainian government agrees to some kind of conditional surrender tomorrow, which would be extraordinarily unlikely, in my opinion. But if they did, first of all, they'd have an immediate legitimacy crisis. Second of all, they would not have control over all of these agencies. They would likely branch off and continue to do things like this. Um, and you zeroed in, Dave, on something absolutely crucial to all of this. It probably didn't cost them much more than a couple $100,000 at the most to do this. Um, the drones were cheap. The explosives, I don't doubt, were cheap. Probably the most expensive thing was rigging up the containers and buying
Hmm.
the headsets for the drones. That was probably it. That was probably the main costs. Everything else, they did cheap, cheap. So this is 117 drones, and I doubt they broke $1 million on this. Really. Um, and
And
again, if
potentially
they
in training. I would think they probably spent more on training budgets than they did on
probably,
the actual weapons and drones used in this attack. They're
I
investing
would
more in
imagine,
personnel than they are in the
yeah,
actual military assets that they're using.
yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And yeah, and it's just there's a war of economies here where they spent minimal money on this operation, and again, at least a couple $100 million of losses, not to mention, and again, you brought this up, Dave, the additional costs of basically having to redo security on every Air Force base in the country, um, of having to build hardened air shelters, of having to put up drone nets, of having to invest in counter aircraft weapon systems. Those
Hmm.
costs add up very quickly, and they are now going to be forced to invest in it at a moment when they don't have a ton of cash.
Yeah.
They're going to be forced to invest in these things.
Well, I'm looking at this too and going, okay, if this is like Russia's Pearl Harbor or Russia's 9/11 and they're trying to actually improve the security, okay, the knee-jerk reaction is we're going to start checking trucks. So
Hmm.
you guys are going to start going through, they're going to build more truck inspection, I guess, customs facilities. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
no idea how they would actually go about doing this, but more time, more effort, more money, and Ukrainians a couple days ago also, it looks like, blew up a couple of railway bridges and they
Hmm.
blew up a road as well. So they're going after Russia's transport infrastructure. So if the country's transport infrastructure and their logistical lines are already getting slowed down, they add these in there. I mean, this just makes it harder for them to get things to the front. And this is going to cripple Russia's military efforts if the Ukrainians just continue to do small scale and then a big scale drone attack like this. I mean, there's Russia's a much bigger country and they have more people that they can feed into this. But since it's such a big country, Ukraine can take that and use this to their advantage, and they can use their size to cripple them.
And I mean, again, it's a huge country. the infrastructure, particularly the further east you go, it's really dependent on roads. It's really dependent on a couple of road networks. If you
Hmm.
can disrupt those, if you can put the fear of God into people driving through Siberia, you are going to create huge logistical issues away from the front that are going to take up a lot of energy and time that the Russian state cannot afford. This is the thing. They are going to be forced to start making decisions they do not want to make fundamentally,
Hmm.
and they've been able to push off until this point.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I was going to
but
say, I
yeah,
think too, their whole military leadership structure is top down, and there's very
mhm,
little independence in terms of thought. So it's very slow. And they can't just pass this ability to make decisions into the military or into people. It's still top down. So
yeah,
this is going to take a very long time to implement when speed is of the essence. So I look at this, and this is a very scary time for the war in Ukraine because
mm,
I think Russia has no quick response, and they may do something where it would be absolutely just huge, grand scale just to go, yeah, we got you back. But this could be a turning point for the war. And I don't know if it would go into like a tactical nuke, but they could do something just to show that, we're angry and we're getting you back and you don't attack Russia and we're still a strong, powerful country. But it's very likely going to be an emotional response rather than a calculated response.
I would tend to agree with that. And I think it also, I hope people, I'm sure people are, but I think people in the US need to be paying attention to this because it demonstrates you really need to protect your military assets. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we have planes like the F-35, which cost about $120 million a pop, and they're sitting on a tarmac in California. Um, you might want to put some netting up. That's all I'm saying. You might want to put some guns on the roof because again, if the Ukrainians who've been absolutely crippled by the war are able to pull this off, that pretty much means anyone can. If they're motivated. If you're motivated, if you have personnel who've been properly trained, this is achievable. And most large military powers do not have the anti-drone capability. It's just not there yet. Um, so I think you're correct in saying we're entering a new world in terms of asymmetrical warfare. And this is going to affect strategic planning, I would say, in every country on the face of the planet Earth, um, very soon, if not already.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very, very much so. And if you have a big grand army like Russia has, it might even look like something like a Potemkin army, where we have these great big military assets, but we can't really use them, and they're pretty much ineffective against this new technology. So
We can't
something to chew
protect.
on this week.
Yeah. Yeah. Big old bone to chew on. Anyways, thank you very much for listening. We appreciate our listeners here on the Fringe. Please like, share, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your enemies. Don't share with the foreign intelligence community, whoever those people are. Share, like, comment. We appreciate all the comments. Please keep them coming. Thank you very much. This is On the Fringe.